I was polishing the good glasses when the news arrived without so much as a knock. Outside, Riverton's harbor clinked with rigging and gulls. A spring wind rattled the porch chimes, that thin, silvery music I used to call company bells. I had set a lemon cake to cool, a small, foolish celebration for a date that, in my head, still existed. The day my only child would say I do. And I'd stand behind him, proud, tearful, needed. My phone buzzed. A photo, 2 hands, 2 rings, a simple band of light. Then another. Oliver and Sloane beneath a city hall arch, cheeks bright with victory, a cluster of people cheering behind them. I recognized no one, until I did. Sloane's parents. Her sister with the jet black bob. A cousin I'd once helped with a plane ticket for school. The caption read, "Small ceremony. Inner circle only." I stood very still. The chimes kept talking. For the last 3 years, my calendar had been their ledger. On the 1st of every month, I covered rent for their loft on Dock Street. When Oliver's car died, I wrote a check without breathing. When Sloane needed a dental crown, I loaned and said the word like a prayer that would someday come back to me. I bought the sofa they fell in love with, the spice rack for their new kitchen, the winter coats that were too good a deal to pass up. 1,000 small stitches, invisible until the garment comes apart in your hands, and you see all the thread you gave away. I did not cry. I washed my hands, dried them carefully, and set the cake beneath a glass dome so it would not go stale. Somewhere a horn sounded on the water. Somewhere, somebody I had never met toasted my son's future with a champagne I had likely paid for. Sloane called that evening, breezy and bright. Miriam. We kept it super tiny. Just the inner circle, you know how it is. But we want to do a dinner with you soon. Something intimate. Maybe you could host? You always make things so cozy. Inner circle. I repeated, as if tasting a foreign spice. Am I outside of it then? She laughed featherlight, not unkind, simply uninterested in weight. Oh, don't be dramatic. You're foundational. That's different. Foundational, like a footing poured in the ground. Unseen, expected, stepped on. We said good night. I set the phone on the counter and stared at its black screen until my face blurred into a soft, tired moon. I had planned for a dress, dark blue with a neat waist. I had planned for shoes that did not pinch. I had planned to tuck a card into Oliver's palm with a blessing and more money than made sense because sentiment makes people generous and mothers are the most sentimental of all. Instead, I made tea. Steam fogged the window. The harbor darkened. A long time ago, when I handled budgets for a school, I learned that numbers don't lie. They merely tell the story you've been avoiding. I opened my laptop. The cursor blinked like a metronome keeping time with the small, quiet thud of my heart. I pulled up Mariner's Trust Bank and scrolled through the scheduled payments. Every month, the transfer went out automatically. Rent to a landlord I had never met. A man who texted me receipts like we were old friends. The cursor hovered over the cancel button. My hand felt silly and light, like it wasn't attached to a real person. Inner circle. I murmured and clicked. The confirmation banner bloomed across the screen. It was not triumphant. It was not cruel. It was simply done. Later, tucked into sheets that still smelled faintly of lavender, I pictured Oliver at 6, running the length of our old hallway, the cheap carpet charging his socks with static. He would tap my arm and laugh when the spark snapped. I shocked you, he'd crow, greedy for the miracle, not knowing what a miracle it was just to be tapped by him at all. The next day, someone would notice a missing transfer. They would call, and the word foundation would be used again, as if love were a concrete pour that hardened around a pipe and called it family. I switched off the lamp. On the nightstand, beside the phone, I placed the blue dress receipt and the lemon cake recipe card. One belonged to a plan that had ended before it began. The other was a promise that still held. I could make something sweet out of what remained. In the dark, my heartbeat slowed and widened like the tide. The wind came in off the water, and the chimes answered, thin and bright and brave. Morning crept into the kitchen like a hesitant apology. Light sifted through the blinds, thin as gauze, settling over the unpaid bills and grocery lists that lived on my counter like loyal ghosts. The lemon cake from yesterday sat untouched under its dome, its sweetness beginning to fade, much like my excuses. I had not slept. Instead, I kept hearing that phrase, circling like a gull above a shipwreck. Inner circle. Inner circle. I was orbiting outside of something I had built myself. There was an old habit I used to have back when I worked at the school. Whenever a budget went wrong, I opened a fresh notebook, drew 2 columns, and wrote the truth down until it stopped hiding. That morning, I did the same. Only this time, the deficit wasn't financial. It was emotional. And it had my son's handwriting all over it. I made coffee, black and steadying, and took out a pad. The pen hesitated for a second, a strange sort of fear, as if the ink itself might judge me. Rent, $800 every month 36 times. Furniture, sofa, table, bed, about $3,200 total. Groceries, weekly top-ups, just until Sloan finds steady work. $200 here, $150 there, call it another $6,000. Medical bills, car repairs, vacations, will pay you back soon. Another mountain of kindness misfiled as duty. When I added it all, the number sat at the bottom of the page like a quiet insult. $28,940. $28,940. It wasn't the amount that made me sick. It was the memory attached to every line. Each transfer carrying a little piece of my hope that they might someday look at me not as a solution, but as a person. My phone buzzed. Sloan's name glowed across the screen. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times, the rhythm of old obedience, before I answered. Miriam? Hi. Sorry to bother you so early. We just realized rent didn't go through. You must have forgotten the transfer, silly thing. The landlord's being a nightmare. Could you sort it out today? Her voice was light, sugar over stone. I stared at the notebook in front of me. The neat columns, the careful ink, and something inside me shifted. A small, solid thing that had slept for years finally opened its eyes. Sloan, I said quietly. Didn't I mention yesterday that I only help people in my inner circle? For a moment, silence stretched across the line, brittle and wide. I don't understand, she said at last. You've always been part of ours. You're like a second mom to me. Then maybe, I replied, you should start treating me like one. I hung up before she could answer. My hand was steady, astonishingly so. For once, the weight of the phone didn't crush me. I went back to the notebook and drew a thick red line under the total. Beneath it, I wrote something I hadn't written in decades. Balance due to myself. Outside, the harbor wind kicked up, scattering leaves down the street. It sounded almost like applause, distant, polite, but real. That afternoon, I found myself standing in front of my filing cabinet, that gray, battered thing that had followed me through every move since the 1980s. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out the folder labeled retirement. Inside were the fragments of a future I had delayed. Brochures for small tours in Italy, watercolor workshops, an old printout for a language course in Seville. I ran my finger down the dates, all crossed out, all postponed, until Oliver and Sloan get settled. They had settled beautifully, on me. I poured the cold coffee into the sink and refilled my cup. This time it tasted different, bitter but alive. The sun tilted toward the window, and for the first time in years, the day ahead was entirely mine to spend. No bank transfers to make. No errands for the kids. Just silence, and a number written in red ink that finally meant something honest. As evening came, I closed the notebook and tucked it into the drawer beside the lemon cake. Both were proof of something unfinished, one sweet, one bitter. Tomorrow, I decided, I would go to the bank. It was time to balance more than accounts. The rain began before dawn, thin, persistent, the kind that doesn't fall so much as whisper on the windows. I was sorting laundry when I heard the sound. Not a knock, not the doorbell, but the sharp metallic click of a key turning in my front lock. For a heartbeat, I thought I'd imagined it. Then the door swung open. Oliver stepped inside, already talking. Mom, we didn't want to alarm you, but you haven't answered our calls. Behind him, Sloan appeared in a spotless white trench coat, shaking off rain like an actress arriving on cue. And trailing them came a third man, mid-50s, neat gray hair, leather briefcase in hand, radiating the practiced calm of someone used to being unwelcome. Mrs. Hale, he said smoothly, I'm Mr. Calder. I advise your son and daughter-in-law on some family matters. Family. Such a flexible word. Interesting, I said, since this family doesn't recall inviting anyone in. Sloane smiled with professional warmth. We're just worried. You've been acting distant, and Oliver thought maybe you needed help organizing things financially, legally, so nothing falls through the cracks. Mr. Calder placed a folder on my dining table, right beside the lemon cake dome. A temporary power of attorney, he explained. Purely administrative. It lets them manage your bills until you feel up to it. Up to it. I looked at my son, his eyes not meeting mine, his shoulders stiff with guilt he couldn't name. Oliver, I asked quietly, how did you get my key? He shifted. You gave it to us last year, remember? For emergencies. Then I suppose this is an emergency, I said. Just not mine. I opened the folder. Legal pages, cold and bloodless. My name repeated like a drumbeat. Miriam Hale hereby authorizes. I didn't read the rest. The paper felt oily in my fingers. Without ceremony, I walked to the kitchen bin, lifted the lid, and slid the folder in. Sloane gasped. Miriam. That was important. Yes, I said. That's why it belongs in the trash, not in my life. For a long moment, nobody moved. The rain ticked harder against the windows. Mr. Calder cleared his throat. Mrs. Hale, emotions aside, your son has certain obligations, rent, car payments that depend on me, I finished. And that dependence ends today. Oliver's voice cracked. You can't just cut us off. We built our plans around my money, I said. You built them around my money. I felt oddly calm, as if the years of quiet resentment had crystallized into something diamond hard. Please leave my house, I said. Sloane's charm finally cracked. We're your family. You'll regret this. Maybe, I answered. But I'd rather regret courage than obedience. They hesitated, glancing at Calder. He gathered his briefcase with an irritated sigh. The sigh of a man whose tidy paperwork had been smudged by human will. As the door closed behind them, I locked it. Then I locked the second bolt. I stood there, hand resting on cool brass, until the sound of their car faded down the street. My knees trembled, but the tremor wasn't fear, it was release. In the silence that followed, I could hear the small, deliberate click of my own heartbeat, steady and sure, like a key finally turning in the right direction. The next morning carried that washed-out light that comes after rain, pale, cautious, as though the sky were still deciding whether to forgive itself. I dressed carefully, not for anyone else this time, but for purpose. Dark skirt, neat jacket, hair brushed smooth. The mirror reflected a woman who looked like she was going to work again. And in a sense, she was back to the business of owning her own life. At Mariners Trust Bank, the air smelled of paper and disinfectant. Machines clicked behind glass. A printer spat out someone's mortgage. I'd stood at this counter 100 times before, always to withdraw for them, never for myself. Tara Quinn, the branch manager, recognized me immediately. Good morning, Mrs. Hale, she said, friendly but cautious. Here to make the usual transfer? Not today, I replied. I'm here to stop them. She blinked, then gestured me toward her desk. The screens reflected in her glasses as she brought up my account. Lines and numbers, all perfectly obedient. These automatic payments have been consistent for 3 years, she said gently. Are you sure you want to cancel them? I'm sure, I answered. Every one of them. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard. Is everything all right? For a moment I almost gave the polite answer. Yes, fine, just reorganizing, but politeness had cost me enough. I've realized, I said, that kindness without boundaries isn't generosity. It's extraction. Tara studied me for a second longer, then nodded. I'll cancel them all. And while we're at it, let's add extra security. 2-step verification, new passwords, limited access. No one touches your money but you. Relief bloomed slow and quiet, like warmth returning to a numb hand. As she typed, my phone vibrated again and again in my purse. I didn't have to look to know who it was. Mrs. Hale, Tara said, printing a final sheet. It's done. The transfers are canceled, and your accounts are secure. I took the paper, feeling its crisp weight. Thank you, Ms. Quinn. When I stepped outside, the city felt newly audible, the hum of traffic, the gulls wheeling above the river. I bought a coffee from a cart and stood on the sidewalk, watching the steam rise like a small, private celebration. The phone rang again. Oliver's name this time. I let it ring until the screen went dark. Then a text appeared. "Mom, please answer. We need to talk." I deleted it without opening. For the first time in years, the silence that followed wasn't lonely. It was spacious, almost musical. I walked home slowly, past the bakery, the bookstore, the park where Oliver used to chase pigeons and laugh like the world owed him nothing. At my kitchen table that evening, I spread the paperwork out in front of me. Cancelled transfers. New passwords. My signature strong, unshaken. There it was, my first no. Not shouted, not dramatic. Just final. And in that quiet word lay the beginning of everything else. For 2 days, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Different numbers, same desperation. Oliver's voice leaving messages that started polite and ended with frustration. And Sloane's sugar-dipped apologies that always arrived just before rent was due. I silenced them all, then unplugged the landline for good measure. The house, once filled with electronic chimes and notifications, fell into a kind of peace I hadn't heard in years. The silence was loud enough that I began to notice other sounds. The hum of the refrigerator, the rhythm of rain on the awning, the faint rustle of my neighbor's hedge whenever the wind passed through. That's how I first met Evelyn Moss. It was late afternoon when she appeared on the other side of the garden fence, wearing gardening gloves and a sun-bleached hat. Her gray hair was tied in a knot that refused to behave, and her eyes had the sharp brightness of someone who'd lived long enough to stop pretending she hadn't seen everything. "You've been quiet lately," she said, trimming a hydrangea. "Everything all right?" I hesitated. The polite answer came automatically to my lips, but something about her voice, calm, dry, certain, unstitched the usual reflex to hide. "I suppose that depends on your definition of all right," I said. Evelyn smiled faintly. The honest kind of trouble." She came around the hedge and leaned on the fence post. Up close, she smelled of lavender and soil. "I heard shouting a few days ago. I was worried." "They let themselves in," I admitted. "My son and his wife. And a lawyer. They wanted me to sign over my finances." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, but she didn't look surprised. "And you didn't?" "No." "Good." She nodded once, as if checking a box. "You'd be amazed how many don't have the courage to say no." I wanted to ask how she knew, but she was already talking. "I volunteer at a local center, senior advocacy. We see cases like that every week. Children, nephews, even neighbors who decide someone else's savings should be community property. It's called elder financial abuse. Sounds clinical, doesn't it? But what it really means is heartbreak dressed up as bookkeeping." Her words landed like a diagnosis I hadn't known I needed. "I thought I was just helping," I said quietly. "They always make you think that," she replied. "Until the help starts to hurt." We talked for nearly an hour. She told me about her own daughter, a marriage gone wrong, debts that had swallowed 3 years of Evelyn's pension before she found the nerve to stop. "When I finally cut her off," she said, "she called me cruel. Maybe she was right, but cruelty can be another name for survival." As dusk settled, Evelyn handed me a small card. On it was a handwritten list of numbers: the local legal aid office, a financial counselor, and her own phone. "Call any of them," she said. "Or just knock on my door. I'm usually in the garden, pretending to keep things alive." I smiled for the first time in days. "Thank you." When she left, I stood among the soft smell of earth and wet grass. The lights from her kitchen glowed warm through the hedge, not intrusive, just present. That night, I brewed chamomile tea and sat by the window. Across the street, headlights slowed, idled, then rolled past again. Same car as yesterday. And the day before. Oliver's car. The sight should have frightened me, but instead, a strange calm settled over me. If he was watching, then he'd seen the locks changed, the blinds drawn, the house that no longer opened itself on command. I took Evelyn's card from the counter and set it beside the phone. Her handwriting was strong and looping, the kind of script that belonged to people who knew their worth. I whispered the numbers once, committing them to memory. Outside, the car engine faded into the distance, swallowed by the night. The hedge shivered in the wind, A soft applause from the only witness who truly understood. Tomorrow, I decided, I would make one of those calls. Maybe all of them. For now, it was enough to know I wasn't alone on this side of the fence. Morning came with that quiet blue light that always reminded me of new beginnings. The kind that slips between curtains and makes even old rooms feel honest. The phone sat where I'd left it the night before, beside Evelyn's card. I stared at the list of numbers until the one that mattered most seemed to lift from the page. Jonas Pike, elder law specialist. I dialed before I could lose courage. His voice was steady, low, and practical, like a man who repaired storms instead of roofs. Mrs. Hale, he said after I gave the outline, you've already done the hardest part. You said no. Now we'll make sure that no stays protected. By noon, I was in his office on Bay Street. The building was plain brick, nothing grand, but the moment I stepped inside, I could feel order humming in the air. Books lined the walls. Case law, family statutes, titles that smelled of ink and caution. Jonas was younger than I expected, maybe late 40s, with reading glasses that he seemed too impatient to actually wear. He took notes while I told him everything, from the secret wedding to the fake lawyer in my living room. He didn't interrupt, only nodded once in a while, the pen gliding smoothly across the page. When I finished, he leaned back. What you're describing, he said, is classic coercive dependence. They built a lifestyle around your resources, and when you withdrew them, they panicked. It's not about family, it's about supply. The word supply made me flinch. It stripped away every sentimental excuse I'd ever used for their behavior, and left the truth bare and ugly. So what do I do now? First, he said, we make your boundaries legal. I'll file a temporary no-contact order to keep them off your property. We'll also document every transfer you made and every request they issued. The more records we have, the stronger the defense if they try to claim incompetence or emotional instability, which frankly, I suspect will be their next move. Claim incompetence? He folded his hands. It's common. If they can't access your money willingly, they'll argue you're unfit to handle it. It's easier to take control if they make you look fragile. I let out a shaky laugh. They've spent years calling me strong. It seems that changed the moment I stopped paying rent. Jonas smiled faintly. Funny how independence becomes a problem once it threatens someone else's comfort. He handed me a folder. Inside is a checklist, financial accounts to secure, locks to change, passwords to reset, everything practical. Paper shields, he said, tapping the folder. They may look dull, but they're the armor that keeps real doors closed. I signed what he gave me, one page after another, until the pen left a small dent in my finger. For every signature, I felt lighter. When I left the office, the sun had broken through. I stopped at a cafe and sat by the window, watching people hurry down the street. Nobody there knew me. Nobody expected anything from me. It was an anonymity I hadn't realized I'd missed. Halfway through my coffee, my phone lit up again. Unknown number. I let it ring, but the screen stayed persistent. After the fourth call, I answered. A woman's voice, unfamiliar but official, spoke briskly. Mrs. Hale? This is Ms. Reyes with Social Services. We've received a report that you may be experiencing confusion or undue influence. We need to schedule a wellness visit. The words froze in the air. There it was, their next move. I see, I said evenly. Do you happen to know who filed that report? I'm afraid that's confidential, she replied, tone clipped, rehearsed. But we do have to verify that you're safe and capable of managing your affairs. I'm perfectly capable, I said. But if you insist on visiting, please note that my attorney, Mr. Jonas Pike, will be present. A pause. Then the faint sound of typing. Of course, she said. I'll record that. When the call ended, I stared out at the street again. A man with a newspaper walked by. A woman pushed a stroller. Someone laughed too loudly on their phone. All perfectly ordinary. And yet, my world had just tilted again. I dialed Jonas immediately. They've started, I told him. He didn't sound surprised. They usually do. Let them come. We'll be ready. That night, I double-checked the locks, turned off every light except the one in the hall, and sat on the edge of my bed. The folder Jonas had given me lay open on the nightstand. page after page of cold clarity. Somewhere outside, a car idled for a few minutes before driving away. I didn't even bother looking through the blinds. Paper shields might not stop a storm, but they can redirect its wind. And by morning, I intended to build walls higher than anyone expected. The day of the visit arrived in a hush so complete it almost felt staged. The rain had passed, leaving a pale sky and that soft, hesitant light that makes everything look more fragile than it really is. I had opened every curtain, brewed coffee, and set 2 clean cups on the table. One for me, one for the stranger who would decide if I was sane enough to keep my own life. At 9:05, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a woman in a beige trench coat clutching a folder and wearing a badge on a lanyard. She looked younger than I expected, early 30s maybe, polite exhaustion in her posture. I opened the door halfway. Mrs. Hale? Yes. I'm Ms. Reyes from Social Services. I appreciate your time. This shouldn't take long. Please come in, I said, holding the door wide enough for her and no more. My attorney will join us in a moment. Her eyebrows lifted just slightly. Oh, you've already arranged legal counsel? I learned it's better to have witnesses when one's wellness is being questioned, I said, guiding her to the living room. She offered a small, non-committal smile and sat down on the edge of the sofa. The same one I'd bought for Oliver and Sloane years ago, now reclaimed from their comfort. A few minutes later, Jonas arrived, crisp suit, steady voice, carrying his own folder that looked twice as thick as hers. He greeted her politely, then took the seat beside me like a wall that could think. Ms. Reyes opened her folder. We received a report suggesting possible cognitive decline and erratic financial behavior. Cutting off family support, isolating yourself, installing unnecessary security systems. Unnecessary, Jonas repeated, after her family entered her home without consent. Her pen paused. I'm just reading the file. Of course, I said. Please go on. She looked at me again, studying, weighing. Mrs. Hale, do you feel that anyone has been pressuring or influencing your decisions recently? Yes, I said simply. My son and his wife. They pressured me for years to fund their lives, then accused me of confusion when I stopped. Her expression flickered. One small crack in the professional neutrality. And you've been living alone since your husband passed? For 20 years. I've managed my bills, taxes, investments, and home maintenance on my own. Would you like to see the paperwork? Before she could answer, Jonas slid a folder across the coffee table. Here are her last 3 years of financial statements. All in order. Here's documentation of automatic transfers she made to her son and his wife. Roughly $30,000. And here, he flipped a page, are the text messages demanding money after she stopped. Ms. Reyes scanned the papers, her posture tightening. I see. She's not isolated, Jonas continued. She has neighbors, social contact, and a therapist she's seen occasionally since her husband's passing. The only isolation came from the family members who exploited her. I watched the social worker's eyes as she read. They softened, just slightly, like someone realizing a picture had been hung upside down for years. Finally, she looked up. Mrs. Hale, one more question. Why did you decide to cut off financial support so suddenly? I folded my hands in my lap. Because I realized love shouldn't come with a receipt. The sentence hung in the air, quiet but sharp. Even Jonas glanced at me, half a smile ghosting across his face. Ms. Reyes closed her folder. Thank you, Mrs. Hale. I've seen all I need to. There's no evidence of cognitive decline or self-neglect here. In fact, she glanced at Jonas, you appear to be managing things better than most people I visit. She stood, tucking the papers under her arm. I'll file my report by the end of the week. This case will be closed. Thank you, I said, meaning it. After she left, I exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. Jonas remained seated, flipping one of the empty coffee cups in his hands. That, he said finally, was round one. They were testing the waters. Expect them to escalate. I figured as much. Good, he said, standing. Then let's be ready. When the door closed behind him, I walked to the window. Across the street, a familiar car idled again. The same one, always parked a little too long, always pretending to check directions. I lifted my phone, snapped a photo, and texted it to Jonas with a single line. Round 2 has already begun. Outside, the wind shifted the hedge, rustling Evelyn's garden. I could see her through the branches, waving a small trowel in salute. I raised my hand back. The war had changed tone. No longer panic, no longer fear, just strategy. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was on the winning side. For a few quiet days, it seemed as if the storm had finally burned itself out. The phone stopped ringing. The car across the street disappeared. Even the air in the house felt different, lighter, almost forgiving. I went for walks again, let the sun fall across my face, and began to believe that maybe, just maybe, the worst had passed. Then Jonas called. "Miriam," he said, voice clipped and businesslike, "you'd better come by. We've received copies of their new filing." My stomach tightened. What filing? They've submitted affidavits, statements from 3 witnesses claiming you've shown signs of instability and confusion. Your son and daughter-in-law are building a case. By the time I reached his office, my palms were damp. Jonas already had the folder open on his desk. The pages inside smelled faintly of toner and betrayal. "Look," he said, pointing. "First, your neighbor Mr. Bram. He claims you've been acting erratically, yelling at people, installing cameras everywhere, and talking to yourself in the garden." I laughed, but it came out thin. If defending my house counts as erratic, then yes, guilty. "Next," Jonas continued, "a pharmacist named Mr. Nettles. He states you've refused to take prescribed medication, and that your daughter-in-law expressed concern about your mental health." "I don't even have prescribed medication," I said. "Unless vitamins count." He nodded. "Then we'll go talk to him first." The pharmacy smelled of lemon disinfectant and stale perfume. Mr. Nettles was behind the counter, sorting pill bottles into neat little rows. When he saw me, his face flushed the color of paper cuts. "Mrs. Hale," he stammered. "I was hoping you wouldn't. I mean, I didn't know that statement was." Jonas stepped forward, calm as ever. "Mr. Nettles, did my client refuse to take any medication prescribed by a physician?" He shook his head rapidly. "No, she's healthy. Just buys vitamins and the occasional aspirin. But Mrs. Carter, your daughter-in-law, came in saying you were forgetting things, maybe not taking what you should. She asked me to sign a form verifying your purchase history for their insurance." "Insurance?" I repeated. He winced. "I didn't realize it was for a legal filing. I swear I wouldn't have signed if I'd known." Jonas slid a sheet of paper across the counter. "Then you'll write a new statement clarifying exactly that. Today." Mr. Nettles signed with shaking hands, eyes full of guilt. When we left, I almost pitied him, almost. Next stop, the White House across the street. The blinds in Mr. Bram's windows twitched before we even knocked. When he opened the door, the smell of stale tobacco wafted out. "What do you want?" he barked. Jonas didn't flinch. "Mr. Bram, you provided a written statement claiming my client has been behaving irrationally. We'd like you to specify what behaviors you personally observed." "I don't have to justify myself," he said, chin jutting out. "She's been acting strange for months, putting up cameras like she's in a spy movie, shouting at those people in the street." "You mean my son and his wife?" I interrupted. "The ones who broke into my house." His mouth twitched. "That's what a crazy person would say." I felt the heat rise in my chest, but Jonas touched my sleeve. A silent reminder that fury was exactly what they wanted. "Thank you for your time," he said coolly. "Your statement will be noted for what it is, hearsay." As we walked back to the car, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from disbelief. How easily people believe the worst version of a woman who stops being useful, I said. Jonas sighed. "They're counting on that. But don't worry. Facts are louder than gossip when you have documentation." That evening, I sat at my kitchen table again. The same spot where I'd once written checks and birthday cards and letters of apology that were never acknowledged. Now the table was my command post. I laid out every receipt, every message, every bank statement Jonas had copied for the case. It looked less like a life and more like evidence. Evelyn dropped by, carrying a casserole and her usual disarming calm. "You look like you're planning a war," she said. "In a way, I am," I answered. They're trying to prove I'm incompetent. She snorted. Then they'll have to explain how you manage to make better pie crust than anyone on this street. Let me know when they want a demonstration. I'll bring witnesses. Her humor steadied me more than any legal advice. As she left, I noticed a paper tucked halfway under my door. I bent to pick it up. It wasn't a note this time, just a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet. A printed notice from the county courthouse. Hearing scheduled. Petition for guardianship of Miriam Hale. The words blurred, then sharpened again. The date was 2 weeks away. So this was it. The escalation Jonas had predicted. I looked out the window toward Evelyn's yard, where the rosemary bushes were glowing silver in the moonlight. For a long time, I stood there, envelope in hand, letting the cold certainty settle in. They were going to drag me to court to prove I didn't know my own mind. But what they'd forgotten was that my mind was the one thing they'd never actually owned. And this time, I intended to make them remember it. The courthouse letter lay open on my kitchen table for 2 days before I could bring myself to touch it again. The words petition for guardianship seemed to hum, like an electric wire running through the paper. Guardianship, the polite legal term for declaring a person incapable of governing her own life. Jonas wasn't surprised. They've filed the petition, he said over the phone. It's what we expected. They'll try to prove mental decline. We'll answer it with proof of the opposite. So I took the test. The examination. Dr. Leona Creed's office was filled with soft light and tidy plants, nothing sharp, nothing rushed. She greeted me with a handshake firm enough to make the point that she didn't see me as fragile. We'll talk for a while, she said. Then I'll run a few standard assessments. Memory, reasoning, problem solving. It's not about trick questions. It's about clarity. For 2 hours she asked. What day is it? Tuesday. Count backward by sevens. 86, 79, 72. Describe what you'd do if you smelled smoke in your home. Call the fire department, turn off power, get outside. Simple questions, but each one landed like a small act of rebellion. Every correct answer was a door closing on their narrative. When it was done, Dr. Creed smiled. Your cognitive function is excellent, Mrs. Hale. Better than most people 10 years younger. I'll prepare a written evaluation for the court. Her calm certainty felt like oxygen. Preparing for battle. That evening Jonas came by with Evelyn, who insisted on bringing soup, and an extra layer of moral reinforcement. My dining table had become a war desk again. Piles of statements, photographs, bank records. Jonas ticked items off his list. Dr. Creed's upcoming report. Mr. Nettles' corrected affidavit. Documentation of every payment I'd made to Oliver and Sloan. Copies of the security camera footage, showing their uninvited visit. Facts win cases, he said. Not tears, not charm. Facts. Evelyn leaned back, arms folded. And a good pair of heels. Never go to court looking small. I smiled despite myself. You plan to come? Wouldn't miss it, she said. Quiet before the hearing. The days before the hearing were oddly peaceful. I watered the plants, walked along the harbor and painted small things, rooftops, boats, the curve of light over the water. Each brushstroke reminded me of control, of precision, of hands that still knew what they were doing. Then the mail came again. A thick envelope from Jonas. Inside were copies of everything we'd send to the court. Dr. Creed's evaluation, Evelyn's witness statement, Mr. Nettles' correction, and my own sworn declaration. At the top of the stack was a single sentence Jonas had typed in bold. The respondent, Miriam Hale, demonstrates full cognitive competence and has acted rationally to protect herself from financial exploitation. I read that line 3 times. It felt like a small, well-built bridge between the life I'd lost and the one I was constructing plank by plank. That night, the wind off the river rattled the new locks, but I wasn't afraid. The house no longer echoed with their absence, only with my breathing, steady and sure. Next week, they'd see me not as a confused old woman, but as what I had always been. The one who paid attention, the one who kept the books, the one who never forgot a single number. And when the gavel finally came down, it would be their turn to account for every debt. The courthouse smelled faintly of dust and disinfectant. That peculiar mix of age and sterility that clings to places where too many truths have been handled like evidence. Evelyn sat beside me in the hallway, her gloved hands folded neatly around a thermos of tea. Jonas paced nearby, crisp and composed, checking his notes for the 5th time. I was calm, not fearless, just calm in that bone-deep way you become when there's nothing left to lose but your dignity. And you refused to surrender that too. At 9 sharp, the clerk called my name. Case of Oliver Hale and Sloane Carter versus Miriam Hale. We entered. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, a box of pale wood and echo. The judge, Honorable Patricia Marin, looked like a woman who'd seen every flavor of family betrayal and no longer found it interesting. On the opposite side, Oliver avoided my eyes. He was wearing a new suit that fit too tightly across the shoulders, as if the gilt beneath it needed room. Sloane was flawless as ever. Pearl earrings, black dress, tears ready behind her lashes. Their attorney, a silver-haired man named Mr. Fenton, radiated practiced sympathy. Your Honor, he began smoothly, this is a case of concern, not greed. My clients love Mrs. Hale. They've watched her deteriorate, making irrational financial decisions, cutting off contact, influenced by outsiders. They simply wish to ensure her safety and stability. Influenced by outsiders. That would be Evelyn. That would be Jonas. That would be every boundary I'd finally learned to build. Fenton continued, painting a portrait of a confused widow misled by manipulative neighbors. His voice had the tone of someone delivering a eulogy for a woman still alive. Then it was Jonas's turn. He rose slowly, one page in his hand, and spoke in that even, deliberate rhythm that makes every word sound like a fact already proven. Your Honor, this is not a case of concern. It is a case of control. My client, Mrs. Hale, has demonstrated full financial and cognitive competence. What her son and daughter-in-law call irrational behavior was the single rational act of her life, ending years of financial exploitation. He presented the documents one by one, Dr. Creed's evaluation, Mr. Nettle's retraction, the photographs, the receipts. Each page landed on the clerk's desk like a nail in the coffin of their story. Then came the witnesses. Sloane went first, tears glistening perfectly as she told the judge how I'd become withdrawn and hostile. She used to call me her daughter, she said softly. Now she won't even answer the phone. Jonas's cross-examination was surgical. Mrs. Carter, he said, when was the last time you called my client without requesting money? She hesitated. That's not the point. It is the point, he cut in gently. Because love that only rings when bills are due isn't love, is it? The courtroom fell still. Even the judge looked up. Next came Oliver. His voice cracked in that boyish way I used to rush to comfort. I just wanted to help my mother, he said. She's been different lately. Paranoid. We couldn't reach her. Jonas slid a photograph onto the projector. The security footage from the day they'd entered my house uninvited, the lawyer rummaging through my papers. Is this your idea of reaching out, Mr. Hale? Oliver's jaw tightened. We were trying to protect her. From what? Jonas asked softly. Her own bank account? Oliver's silence was answer enough. Then it was my turn. I walked to the stand, my hands steady on the rail. I took the oath, met the judge's eyes, and spoke plainly. For 3 years, I said, I gave them everything they asked for, rent, groceries, emergencies that never stopped being emergencies. I thought that was love. But love that has to be purchased isn't love at all. When I finally stopped paying, they stopped calling. Until they realized they couldn't live without my wallet. I could feel Sloane's glare, hot and sharp across the room, but I didn't look her way. I'm not confused, Your Honor, I continued. I'm finally clear. I've been a bookkeeper all my life. I know when numbers stop adding up, and this family's math was built on lies. For the first time that morning, the judge's expression softened. Thank you, Mrs. Hale. When both sides rested, Judge Marin disappeared into chambers. The waiting felt endless. Evelyn squeezed my hand once, firm and wordless. Jonas didn't speak, but the faintest smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the look of a man who already knew the outcome. Finally, the judge returned. She adjusted her glasses, shuffled her notes, and began. After reviewing all submitted evidence and testimony, It is the court's opinion that Mrs. Miriam Hale is fully competent to manage her own affairs. There is no evidence of cognitive impairment or undue influence. Oliver's head dropped. Sloane's tears vanished like someone had flipped a switch. The judge's voice hardened. Furthermore, it appears the petitioner's actions stem from financial motives rather than genuine concern. The court denies the request for guardianship and cautions the petitioners against further harassment. This case is dismissed. The gavel struck once. Clean, decisive, final. For a moment, the sound echoed through me like a bell I hadn't known I was waiting to hear. Freedom doesn't roar, it exhales. As we left the courtroom, I passed Oliver in the hall. For a heartbeat, he looked like the boy he once was, unsure, frightened, lost. "Mom," he whispered. "You didn't have to make it public." "I didn't," I said. "You did." Sloane's eyes were ice. "You'll regret this." I smiled faintly. Regret has been my hobby for too long. I'm retiring from it. Outside, the sky had opened into sunlight, the clean kind that makes everything look newly washed. Evelyn let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. "You did it," she said. "We did." I corrected her. Jonas nodded once, slipping his papers into his briefcase. "Case closed," he said. "But your new life? That's just starting." We walked down the courthouse steps together. For the first time in years, the air tasted like salt and possibility. The morning after the ruling, I woke to a kind of silence I didn't recognize. Not the brittle quiet of waiting for a phone to ring. Not the tense hush before an argument. This was different, solid, whole, like a room that had been emptied of ghosts. The sunlight found its way through the blinds and touched the edge of the framed photo on my dresser. It was one of the last pictures of Oliver before everything changed. Him at 21, grinning under a college banner I'd helped him afford. For a long moment, I just looked at it. At the boy who'd once believed the world was kind because his mother made it so. I got up slowly, made coffee, and opened the kitchen window. Outside, the harbor wind carried the smell of salt and engine oil, mingled with something faintly sweet from the bakery 2 blocks over. The world had continued turning, indifferent to my little courtroom victory. And that was comforting. When Jonas called, his tone was brisk but warm. "The order's officially filed. You're legally untouchable now. They can't come near you, can't touch your accounts, can't contact you without violating a restraining clause." Untouchable. I repeated. "It sounds like armor." "That's what it is," he said. "Paper armor, but it works." After we hung up, I found myself laughing softly, because even the word armor felt strange in my mouth. I'd spent most of my life believing protection meant compliance, that peace came from smoothing every edge and never saying no. But real peace, I was learning, begins the moment you stop apologizing for existing. Later that day, Evelyn came by with her garden gloves still on and dirt on her cheek. "The paper said the court sided with you," she announced. "I told you those fancy degrees of yours weren't for nothing." "It wasn't degrees," I said. "It was boundaries." She smiled. "Same thing, really." We sat outside on the porch, sipping tea while the wind stirred the leaves. For a while, we didn't talk at all. It was enough just to be in the company of someone who didn't need anything from me but time. But peace, I soon learned, doesn't last without a test. That evening, as the sun dipped low and turned the water gold, a shadow fell across my doorway. I opened it to find an envelope resting on the mat. No stamp, no return address, just my name, handwritten in the same looping script I'd seen too many times on birthday cards and grocery lists. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "You may have won in court, but this isn't over. You've turned my family against me, and someday you'll see what you've done." No signature, but it didn't need one. Sloane's perfume still lingered faintly on the page, floral, sharp, the scent of entitlement dressed as elegance. I stood there for a long time, the wind brushing against the hem of my cardigan, until Evelyn's voice came from the hedge. "Something wrong." I held up the note. "Old habits die hard." She frowned. "Keep it. We'll file it if she shows up again." I nodded. Then I folded the paper once, twice, and placed it inside the folder Jonas had labeled evidence, personal copy. The difference this time was simple but profound. I wasn't saving it out of fear. I was saving it out of control. That night, I slept with the windows open. The air moved through the house like breath, cool and real. The harbor lights flickered in the distance, steady and patient. For the first time in years, I dreamed not of people leaving me, but of myself walking away, quietly, deliberately, into a life that was finally mine. 2 weeks after the ruling, the locksmith arrived. He was a cheerful young man with hands that looked too clean for the work he did. 3 new deadbolts, he said, whistling softly as he unpacked his tools. We'll make sure nobody can waltz in without an invitation. As I watched him work, something unexpected stirred in me. Relief, yes, but also pride. Each click of the drill sounded like punctuation on the sentence I'd been writing for months. This house is mine again. When he was done, he handed me a small ring of keys. Brand new, he said. No copies anywhere. I ran my thumb over the cool metal. Good, I said. Let's keep it that way. That afternoon, I took a walk through downtown Riverton. It was early spring again, the kind of day when sunlight feels like forgiveness. The shop windows gleamed. The gulls squawked above the docks. For the first time in years, I noticed how alive the city was without my worry pressed over it like a lid. I stopped in front of the train station and looked at the departures board. Boston, Portland, Montreal. Names that used to belong only to other people's adventures. I bought a ticket without overthinking it. 1 round trip, Boston and back, just to prove I could. The next morning, I boarded the train with a small suitcase and a larger sense of permission. I sat by the window, coffee in hand, and watched the world slide by in ribbons of gray and green. Every mile felt like a soft undoing of something old. In Boston, I walked through the public gardens, visited a small art museum, and sat on a bench near the harbor sketching the skyline. I had once loved drawing, back when life had room for useless joys. By the time I returned home 2 days later, I'd filled 3 pages with crooked buildings and imperfect trees, and for the first time in decades, I didn't care that they weren't symmetrical. Back in Riverton, Evelyn was waiting on my porch with her usual blend of sarcasm and sincerity. You disappear for 48 hours and don't even text, she said, mock scolding. I thought you'd run away with the locksmith. I laughed, a sound that felt foreign and good. If I had, I'd have left you the spare key. She grinned. You finally took a break. About time. I needed to see if the world still existed without me, I said. Turns out it does. Evelyn pulled a small flyer from her bag. I brought this. Local community centers looking for volunteers, people with accounting or admin experience. They help seniors with bills, paperwork, that sort of thing. I took it, scanned the text, and felt something in my chest settle into place. I think I'd like that, I said. A week later, I stood in the modest office of the Riverton Senior Resource Center, surrounded by filing cabinets and sunlight. The director, a man in his 60s named Peter Dalton, shook my hand warmly. We could use someone like you, Mrs. Hale, he said. Most of our clients don't need charity. They just need someone to tell them they're not crazy for wanting to keep control. The words felt like they were written directly for me. By the end of the day, I had my first assignment. Helping a retired librarian named Nora untangle a pile of suspicious bank withdrawals her nephew had been making on her behalf. It was eerie and familiar, like watching an old film of my own mistakes. But this time, I knew exactly what to do. When I came home that evening, I found a small white envelope under my door again. My heart skipped, but this one was postmarked. Inside was a thank you card from the center. You helped someone today. That matters. I pinned it to my refrigerator beside a note from Evelyn reminding me to water her dahlias while she visited her sister. That night, I brewed tea and stood by the window, watching the lights ripple on the harbor. The city breathed, and so did I. No more waiting for apologies that would never come. No more proving my sanity to those who profited from my doubt. The new locks gleamed in the moonlight, silent and sure. And behind them lived a woman who had learned that safety isn't the absence of threat, it's the presence of self. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, warm and quiet, the kind of day when even the seagulls seemed too lazy to argue. I was pruning the rosemary bush by the porch when a shadow fell across the gate. Mum. The voice was hesitant, almost unfamiliar. I turned, and there he was, Oliver. Alone. No Sloane, No car idling behind him, no lawyer's folder tucked under his arm. Just my son, older than I remembered, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I didn't speak. I just waited. He pushed the gate open, paused when it clicked against the latch, as if asking for permission to enter a world that used to be his by default. Can we talk? I nodded once. Out here, I said. The garden's safer ground. We sat on the porch steps, the rosemary between us, its scent cutting through the heavy air. He kept his eyes on his hands. Hands that had once built sandcastles and now fidgeted with a torn thread on his sleeve. I didn't come for money, he began. I know, I said. You wouldn't have come yourself if you had. He swallowed. Sloane's gone. She left last week. Said she didn't sign up for public humiliation. I think she meant the trial. I see. He rubbed his face, looking smaller by the second. I thought I was doing the right thing. She said you were losing control. That if we didn't step in, someone else would. I believed her. She made it easy to believe, I said softly. He looked up at me then. The same brown eyes that used to plead for one more story, one more ride, one more chance. I'm sorry, Mom. I don't know how to fix it. I wanted to say something sharp, something that would remind him of the months I spent patching the holes he'd left in my life. But when I opened my mouth, what came out was quieter. You can't fix it, I said. You can only start from what's left. He nodded, shoulders sagging. Do you hate me? No, I said and meant it. But I don't trust you yet. Those are different things. He blinked hard, as if that simple distinction hurt more than any accusation. We sat there in silence for a while. The wind carried the faint sound of church bells from across town, a slow, forgiving rhythm. Finally, he said, I've got a job now. Construction. It's not much, but it's honest. I wanted you to know I'm trying. I'm glad, I said. You should build something that belongs to you. That's how you start to feel whole again. He hesitated. Would it be all right if I called you sometimes? Just to talk. I smiled, tired but real. You can call. But if I don't pick up, you'll wait for me to call back. That's what respect looks like. He nodded. I understand. He stood to leave, then hesitated again. Do you need anything? I shook my head. For once in my life, Oliver, I have everything I need. He smiled faintly, an echo of the boy he used to be, and walked down the path. At the gate, he turned back, lifted a hand in a small, uncertain wave, then disappeared down the street. I stayed there long after he was gone. The sunlight warm on my shoulders, the rosemary swaying gently beside me. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't a gift you gave once. It was a garden, something you tended carefully, pruning away bitterness so the rest could grow. And for the first time, I wasn't tending it for him. I was tending it for myself. Summer arrived like a slow exhale. The harbor shimmered beneath a sky so clear it looked freshly laundered. By then, I had sold the old house. It wasn't a decision made in bitterness, just practicality. Too many echoes in those walls, too many rooms shaped by other people's footsteps. I bought a small apartment overlooking the marina, a place built for light, not memory. The movers came and went. My belongings fit easily into a few boxes. Books, a teapot, framed sketches from Boston, and a single rosemary plant that Evelyn insisted I bring along. Roots, she said, pressing the pot into my hands. Even if you move, take the ones you grew yourself. Evelyn helped me settle in, then lingered by the window as gulls swooped low over the docks. You did it, she said. You got your life back. I'm still learning how to live it, I admitted. That's the best part, she replied. We spent the afternoon planting herbs in a narrow strip of balcony soil. Rosemary, basil, and daisies, stubborn things that bloom even in salt air. The days began to find their rhythm. Mornings were for walking by the pier, greeting fishermen who smelled of diesel and good humor. Afternoons were for the resource center, helping clients filing papers, teaching others what I had learned the hardest way possible. That saying no isn't cruelty, it's self-respect in plain clothes. In the evenings, I painted. Nothing grand, just the view from my window. Sailboats at dusk, gulls hovering above the water, the horizon dissolving into gold. Each brushstroke felt like rewriting my story in a language that required no apology. Sometimes Evelyn joined me. We'd sit with tea, trading silences like old coins. She'd talk about her daughter, who was slowly finding her own way back after years apart. I'd listen, knowing now how much grace it takes to keep loving without rescuing. One evening, a letter arrived in a plain envelope. The handwriting was careful, hesitant. "Hi, Mum. I'm working out of town now, small project on the coast. It's not easy, but I'm clean, saving money. I think about you a lot. I don't know if you want to hear from me, but I wanted to say thank you for standing up for yourself. It taught me more than anything you ever gave me. Oliver." I read it twice. Then I placed it on the mantel beside my sketches. I didn't cry. I didn't write back right away. I simply let the quiet acknowledgement settle, where guilt used to live. Forgiveness, I had learned, doesn't erase history. It just stops letting it own you. That night, the sky over the harbor turned to indigo. Lights winked across the water. Somewhere below my balcony, a fisherman laughed at a joke I couldn't hear. I leaned against the railing, breathing in the smell of salt and oil, and something faintly floral from the balcony garden. The world, I realized, had not become softer. I had become steadier. Behind me, the apartment glowed warm with lamplight. Ahead of me, the sea stretched calm and endless. I didn't know what would come next, and for the first time, I didn't need to. I was my own foundation now. My own circle. My own home. The tide moved in, patient and sure, and I let it carry the sound of everything I no longer owed to anyone.